Hello YouTube and welcome back to another Dare to Game video. Today we're playing Red Dead Online and we're going to be doing something, I guess you could probably call it silly or maybe weird. But today we're going to be ranking every town in Red Dead Online by how fun they are to have a rampage. And so you know what a rampage is in Red Dead Online, you've done it before. You go into a town, you start shooting people up until they call the cops, and then suddenly you got cops all over the place and you basically just see how long you can survive, keep your wanted level up, and kill lots of people. So it may sound terrible and something that only sadistic people would do. And you'd be right. And so today we're going to be ranking them based on how fun they are, how good they are for rampages, you know, basically just all of that real vital and totally objective information. So there are 9 of them, so we're going to start at number 9, and as you can tell, we're actually in Armadillo right now, which takes the number 9 spot. I consider this to be the worst town for doing shootouts. I know there's a lot of reasons for that, but you're probably witnessing one of them right now. For one thing, Armadillo has a very low population. There's just not a lot of people here. So the initial massacre, which I think a lot of people will consider to be the most fun part of a rampage, you know, where you just gun down a bunch of civilians. That part is actually really boring here because there's like 5 or 6 people in Armadillo at any time. And then you can't kill them all. You totally can. Like, I mean, you have the ability to, but if you do, no cops are going to get called and your rampage is going to end right there. So it's definitely a downside to this town. But then even when you do start getting cops to show up, I should say marshals or whatever, there just are not very many of them. Like, you'll get 2 at a time or something like that. It prevents it from being very interesting at all. But with that being said, you can fall off buildings and almost die, so that's fun. But like I said, so just to summarize why this one takes the number 9 spot, it is a very small town, so there's few people to even start the slaughter, and that's not just because the town is small, but also because the population is so small because of whatever plague killed everyone in this town. You can't really go in most of the buildings, so there's not a lot of variation in terrain that you're going to be fighting in, or the cover. So that's another reason why this one isn't very good. And again, you have to deal with very small waves, usually just 2 lawmen at a time. So it keeps the rampage very slow, pretty boring. It's definitely, I guess, easy to maintain. So if you're just trying to keep your wanted level for a long time to get that achievement, you know, the belt buckle, so you can level it up to get 0.4 gold, then I guess this town is good for it. But if you're looking for a fun rampage, Armadillo is the worst. So that's number 9. Let's move on to number 8. So at number 8, we have Strawberry, the scenic tourist trap of Red Dead Online. And now this one is going to follow a lot of the same basic rules that Armadillo followed in being just not a great place to have a rampage. And the first one to start with is, again, a decently low population. So there's just not that many people to rampage initially to get your rampage going. I mean, you can see that there's definitely a lot more than Armadillo, which is why I ranked this one higher, but there aren't, I guess, just giant crowds that you can mow down with a shotgun, so I still consider it to be decently low population. So that's the first reason I don't really care for Strawberry. The second reason is that this is just a poorly made town. I mean, it's not poorly made for living in, but it's definitely poorly made for gunfights, because you've just got a ton of buildings, many of which you can't fully go into, so they're not super useful as cover, and they're all jammed together, so it makes it kind of hectic and very easy to get shot, either from streets that you're not able to cover because you're only one person, or just from blind corners where you're gonna go around them and get blasted with a shotgun. So that's why Strawberry takes the number 8 spot on my most fun to murder lots of people list. So let's move on to number 7. So next up at number 7, we've got probably the smallest town in the game, and that's Tumbleweed. Now this one has advantages over Armadillo in the way that it's decently clustered with lawmen, at least usually, so it's pretty easy to actually get the rampage started because you shoot one person and a lawman in town immediately sees it. So that's where you get an advantage with this one. It's a quick place to start a rampage, but it suffers a lot of the other same problems. It's a very small town, there's not a lot of cover, and what cover there is isn't very vertical. The buildings don't make very good shootout places. Probably the best place in town is obviously the saloon, but it's still not that good compared to quite a few other locations across the map. So, you know, for quite a few reasons, I don't really love it. It is such a small town that it usually makes rampages short and uneventful. I've had multiple occasions where I'm doing a rampage and I'm doing quite well, and then eventually the marshals just seem to stop showing up. They, I guess, lose interest in the mass murderer, so they stop hunting me. Or other times where, like I said, since it's so small, you're right here in, I guess, downtown Tumbleweed, and you just get gunned down immediately because there's overwhelming fire, and it's such a small space. So So for all of those reasons, I don't often choose to do my rampages in Tumbleweed. So that's the number 7 spot. Let's move on to the number 6 spot. So at number 6, we have the farthest away from Tumbleweed that we could possibly go on a $12 fast travel trip, ANNESBURG. It's, I guess you'd call it mostly just a mining town. It's, I like it and I don't like it. So this is where we start getting into the places where I do rampages here sometimes, but I don't love it as much as obviously a lot of the better ones. This one has the advantage of having quite a few people living here. This place is actually decently well populated. So the initial slaughter to start the rampage can actually be pretty intense and fun because there are quite a few people running around, from the mining employees, the civilians, and of course lawmen or anything else like that that gets added in. One of the things that's not so good, it can make it interesting, but it can also make you die fast, is the fact that there are a lot more hostile townfolk and miners in this town. So especially right where I am right now, this is a great spot to unsuspectingly get gunned down by mining employees while you're waiting for the marshals to ride into town. I've done that quite a few times, have my rampage cut very short just by a mining employee with a shotgun that, you know, blasts you when you're not expecting it because you're expecting him to run away like the rest of the civilians. So that is what I would call mostly negative. Another thing about ANNESBURG is that this main street right here where I'm fighting is a kill box. If you get stuck here, you know, you get pinned down or whatever, and you've got actual waves of marshals coming in, I find it decently hard to survive in this kill box. But that's ANNESBURG at number 6, so let's move on to the number 5 spot on my list of most enjoyable places to rampage civilians. Alright, so at number 5 we have the lovely little town of Van Horn, which I guess you could call a trading outpost and not really a town. And this one is one that I actually really enjoy doing rampages in, and I'm not sure why, because it looks terrible. Like, this is one of the dinkiest towns on the map and has probably the least variation in terrain. I mean, maybe not more than Armadillo or Tumbleweed, but it's not great for it. So this one I think gained a special spot in my heart from the single player campaign primarily, just because in the single player campaign there's no cops, there's no police or sheriff or anything in Van Horn. So you can actually get into a great big gunfight and you're really just fighting civilians. So that's kind of fun, and actually it's got a decently high population of hostile civilians. So they will actually fight you. The only bad thing about it is what you're witnessing right now, and it's that sometimes when you try to start a rampage here, your witnesses that need to go report your crime won't actually go report your crime. Now they will, now that I chased them out of town, but you could see that they were just sitting there for a long time. It's the same problem that Emerald Ranch sometimes has, because there's no cop shop right in town here. But like I said, you can see all these hostile townsfolk that are willing to fight. That's one of the things I love about Van Horn. It makes it, sometimes the initial shootout just gets crazy, because there's so many people in town here that will just pull out their guns and immediately murder you. And one of the things that I know a lot of people really enjoy is the lighthouse. As you can see over there, there's a decently tall lighthouse, so if you're a fan of sniping rampages, this is probably the best town for it. You just take your Carcano rifle and probably a shotgun as a backup weapon, and then climb up to the top of the lighthouse and just waste people across town as they ride in. But yeah, so that is why Van Horn takes the number 5 spot. So let's move on to number 4. All right, so in our final 4, we're finally getting into the top 4. We have Saint Denis, or as I like to call it, St. Denis. A lot of people always make fun of me for saying that, but I think it's funny. But anyway, this town has a lot of pros and cons, and despite not actually being my favorite, it is probably the one that I most often do massacres in. And so let's just break down my reasoning for why. So it starts off with the fact that this is by far the biggest city in the game, which is a pro and a con. The pro of that is it has a super high population, including a very large police force. So the very second you shoot someone, you basically start a rampage. You don't have to like wait for witnesses to go tell the cops. There's cops on every corner. So you kill anyone and you immediately are wanted, and you immediately have a decent rampage going on. On top of that, in the more crowded areas of town, the initial slaughter is really, really fun because there's lots and lots of people that you can just mow down. Being the biggest city makes it kind of a clustery, street-laden place, so horse combat can be difficult. I think a lot of times you'll find yourself getting knocked off your horse and getting either trampled down or just gunned down and killed, ending your rampage quickly, or you'll run into a fence or a streetcar or a carriage or something like that. So the thing about being a big city is that it has pros and cons. One of the fun things about Saint Denis is that it seems to be a place that a lot of players like to hang out in, so there's a decent chance of getting other players involved either on your side or against you, and it's definitely a lot of fun to fight other players in the game. So I like the wild card of having other players randomly turning up in your rampage. Like I said, it has tons of cops, by far the highest concentration in the game. So the rampages are usually very intense and fast-paced, and if you're trying to get your honor nice and low, which is what I usually rampage for, it's definitely the quickest place to do it. So that is number 4, Saint Denis. Like I said, a favorite of mine, but not my favorite overall. So let's move on to number 3. All right, so then at the number 3 spot, so we're in the final 3 here, we have the lovely southern hamlet town of RHODES, which is one of definitely my favorite, especially for teammates. So like if you got a posse going on with at least one other person, RHODES is just a lot of fun. And it comes down to just a few basic reasons. For one thing, the layout of this town is great. It's just big enough to have like varied locations and a little bit of verticality and enough to keep it interesting, but small enough to make it real easy to navigate and not have to worry about people bushwhacking you from behind. One of the big things that I love about RHODES is the RHODES Saloon, because it's basically the single best building for like a last stand Alamo style fort shootout out of any civilian style buildings in the game. One of my favorite things to do, either when I'm playing against just lawmen like this or other players, is me and my friends like to hold up inside this bar because it's just got a really fun, varied environment. But yeah, that is in a nutshell why I love RHODES so much as a shootout location. Like I said, it's not my favorite, but it did take the number 3 spot. So that's number 3. Let's move on to number 2. All right, and so at number 2, we have the scenic metropolis that is Blackwater. And this town is like the best of basically every world. So the reaction time, or I should say the police reaction time, is not nearly as quick in Blackwater as it is in Saint Denis, which I think a lot of people would agree is probably a good thing just because Saint Denis is so lightning fast that sometimes it can be hard to get your rampage started properly before you've got cops crawling all over you. But I think it's got a perfect balance because Blackwater has a really big police force, especially for the size. So this one, like I said, as far as pros on this one go, it has a decently high population, which makes the initial slaughter fun and the likelihood of a long drawn-out rampage actually pretty high. It's also got a very large police force, especially for the size, making it far more intense than quite a few other ones on this list, including the last one like RHODES. That one can be intense, but it's usually not going to beat Blackwater for intensity. It's got what I would call the best verticality in the game because you can go up on top of basically every single one of these buildings, and they actually have varied heights. So they're not all the same exact height, so they're going to offer quite a bit of variation in gameplay because of that verticality. And lastly, and probably one of the biggest deals for me just personally, the streets, unlike Saint Denis, where the streets are clustered and you're very, very likely to fall, the streets here are nice and clear. So if you stay on your horse for combat, it's actually decently easy to navigate around without having to worry about getting thrown off your horse or tripping it over or whatever. That's why Blackwater takes my number 2 spot. There's only one town in the game that I think is actually better for rampaging, and we're going to check that one out next. And so that all brings us to our number 1 best spot on the list for Rampage, and of course that is Valentine, which should come as a surprise to absolutely no one. I love this town for a rampage. First of all, it's such a small town, but look at that population density. There's just so many people in this town, and it, like, I just mean for the size, obviously, because it's got nowhere near the population of a place like Saint Denis or even Blackwater. But for the size of this town, there are a lot of people here, and that is just something that I definitely enjoy. But there's a lot of other reasons that I really like Valentine for a good rampage. And one of them, like I said, it's the perfect size town, but there's also very few blind corners. Now there's corners. You can do some pretty fun condensed alleyway fighting. That's going to be real exciting and keep you on the edge of your seat. but not nearly as many blind corners as a place like Strawberry or even Saint Denis. And that's, like I said, just one of the many reasons why this town is so great. It's also got some excellent rooftops for camping, if that's your thing. So if you're by yourself and you don't want to do something quite so intense as like running around with a shotgun mowing people down, maybe you just want to sit up on the roof with a rifle or a repeater and just pick off lawmen as they ride into town. It's got some really good rooftops for that. It's also got great building to building combat. So what I mean by that is most of the buildings in this town you can go in. They've got upstairs so you can climb up and down. You can shoot out windows into other buildings to shoot lawmen or get shot at by lawmen through the windows. It's just very varied and makes you kind of stay on your toes, which I think makes the shootouts a lot more fun. And of course, just the layout of the town is really conducive to gunfighting. It's got the basic L-shaped streets with, like I said, mostly two-story buildings on either side of the road. And most of the buildings are just great for fighting in. If you want to do mounted combat, which I often do, the street here is nice and clear and open. It's got a great big U or circle shaped that you can just keep riding around at high speed, taking out your enemies. It's the perfect town. Like I said, I really like Blackwater, Rhodes, and Saint Denis for rampages like this, but I always find myself coming to Valentine if I'm going to specifically rampage. Those other towns, it's usually something else. Like I'm in that town for something else, and I'm like, you know what? Today's a good day for a rampage, and that's why I do it. Here, I will come here specifically with the intent of rampaging. So, yeah, that is, in summary, the end of my rampage video. I hope you like a video like this. It's not really based on facts or science. There's obviously logic in it, but it's mostly just what I find to be most fun. This is the answer that I give people when they ask how I've played this game for thousands of hours and still enjoy playing it. I do fun little things like massacre the entire population of towns, because the gunplay in this game is very satisfying and fun to experiment with. So that's where we're going to end it for today. Hope you liked this video. Hope you didn't find it too, I guess, disturbing that I have an official ranking for which towns are the most fun for mass murder. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching another Dare to Game video. If you liked this video, please leave a like and a comment. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you like my content and would like to support this channel, consider becoming a member today for as little as $1.99 a month. It makes a huge difference. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day. I'll see you next time.